Good morning. In the natural state of the Illinois River, aquatic plant communities on the floodplain growing in, on, and around the water contributed to ecological processes such as primary production, nutrient cycling, and maintenance of water quality, and provided habitat. And collectively, these processes and habitats help support phenomenal natural diversity and productivity. But by the late 1950s, aquatic plant communities had been nearly eliminated from the Illinois River floodplain by a multitude of stressors, including land use changes, primarily conversion to agriculture, altered hydrology, pollution, and invasive species, with associated degradation of ecosystem integrity, which unfortunately persists today. Subsequent planning and management for restoring ecosystem health has often used floodplain plant communities as critically important conservation targets. For example, the Illinois River Site Conservation Plan that was completed by the Nature Conservancy and approximately 40 partners in 1998, and in 2006, plans for restoration and management of the Conservancy's Emiquon Preserve. So as you have heard this morning, we and our partners have been paying particular attention to aquatic plant communities as the restoration of our Emiquon Preserve proceeds. Before we move into our panel discussions this morning, our major objectives for this presentation are to summarize changes in aquatic vegetation since restoration began at Emiquon in 2007, to provide examples of data sets that might be used to help explain those changes in vegetation, and to share our evolving plans for better understanding changes and their causes to help us formulate effective management strategies to ensure the long-term health of the wetland and its contributions to the Illinois River ecosystem. The Nature Conservancy's 27-hectare or 6,700-acre Emiquon Preserve is along the west side of the Illinois River in west central Illinois. Here, an aerial view with the Illinois River flowing north to south on the right along the eastern boundary of the preserve. Just over 2,200 hectares, or about 5,500 acres, are isolated by approximately 19 kilometers or 12 miles of levee or earthen berm, shown by this red dashed line, and the adjacent bluff to the northwest. As you probably heard from Andy Gilbert earlier this morning, staff from the Illinois Natural History Survey's Forbes Biological Station have been mapping vegetative cover of the wetland since restoration began in 2007, and they annually produce cover maps such as this one for 2012. Here are vegetative cover maps they produced for 2007 through 2014, and more recent vegetative cover maps. The aerial coverages of all the vegetative cover types were calculated for each year and used to create this graph with time on the x-axis and bars representing the aerial extent in hectares on the y-axis of the major vegetative cover types of the wetland, with the darker blue with stippling being the aquatic bed or submersed aquatic vegetation or SAV. Unfortunately, I'll be using those somewhat interchangeably, but aquatic bed, which is made up of submersed aquatic vegetation or SAV, and the mustard colored section of the bars immediately above it being the non-persistent emergent or moist soil vegetation. These are the two cover types we'll be focusing on this morning mainly. After the first couple years of restoration, the aerial extent of the aquatic bed, the blue stippled, was relatively stable through 2017. In 2018, aquatic bed decreased as non-persistent emergent, the mustard, increased. In 2019, each rebounded back to near 2017 levels, and then in 2020 through 21, decreasing aquatic bed, the blue stippled, and increased non-persistent emergent, the moist soil plant shown by the mustard. And as Andy indicated earlier this morning, it appears there was even less aquatic bed in 2022. I've compressed that graph, and let's focus on the recent years that have been more dynamic than the earlier years were. Here are the cover maps for 2017 through 2021. Note the shift in aquatic bed shown by the darker blue in 2017 to non-persistent emergent in 2018, back to the aquatic bed, the darker blue in 19, and then back to non-persistent emergent again in 2020, remaining such in 21, and while not shown here, we believe remaining as non-persistent emergent, the mustard still in 2022. Also, from 20 to 21, note the change of some of the aquatic bed, the darker blue, to open water, the lighter blue. In addition to declines in the aerial extent of the aquatic bed, staff from the Illinois Natural History Survey's Illinois River Biological Station have been collecting field data on the relative density of the submersed aquatic vegetation within the aquatic beds. While they adjusted their methodology a bit in 2016, indicated by red dashed versus red dotted lines, collectively, these data in red indicate a recent decline in the density of submersed aquatic vegetation within the actual aquatic bed. So overall, we have seen declines in the aerial extent, the hectares, of the target aquatic bed, and declines in the density of the submersed aquatic plants within the areas where the aquatic beds persist. What factor or factors might be responsible for these disconcerting declines in the submersed aquatic vegetation? This is an evolving conceptual model to help us visualize many of the multitude of factors that could be impacting the area and density of aquatic bed. Some are direct and relatively simple. For example, herbivores like swans and grass carp consume the vegetation. Or the factors can be indirect and more complex. For example, herbivores increasing dissolved organic matter, thereby contributing to increased phytoplankton production, thereby contributing to increased turbidity, which negatively impacts submersed vegetation by reducing light penetration and availability. We have a number of sometimes disparate and often interrelated data sets collected by partners, some key partners shown here, and by the Conservancy. And if we graph many of those data sets over time along the x-axis, we get this clear picture of what may be affecting the aerial extent, the hectares, and density of submersed aquatic vegetation in the aquatic beds. Oftentimes, there are no simple answers, only simple questions. Let's take a look at just a few of the identified data sets individually. For example, let's start with hydrology. It's been written that hydrology is probably the single most important determinant of the establishment and maintenance of wetlands and wetland processes. This shows the surface water elevation of the wetland at Emiquon on the y-axis with time on the x-axis. After pulling the water level down by pumping, indicated by yellow, in early 2007 in an attempt to control undesirable fish species, restoration in earnest began later in 2007 when pumping water out to the river stopped for the most part. Although the wetland was isolated from the river by the levee, water levels rose from direct precipitation and some flow from the wetland's relatively small watershed. In 2010, we used the old ag pumps to lower water levels, in part for construction of our public use area. In 2013, the flood of record overtopped a section of the levee, and the old ag pumps were removed, leaving us subsequently with no ability to manage water levels. Note that even without infrastructure to manage water levels, without water level management, precipitation and evapotranspiration caused changes of more than 2 feet in the water level during some years. In 2016, we installed a water control structure. It's in the levee between the wetland at Emiquon on the right and the Illinois River on the left. That structure allows us to gravity flow water both out of and into Emiquon from the river when water levels are amenable. And 2 electric pumps can pump water from the wetland into the river. So beginning in 2016, we've used gravity flow out, shown in purple, and gravity flow in, shown in red, and pumping out, shown in yellow, to manage water levels at Emiquon. Let's take a look at vegetation in conjunction with water levels. Water levels at the top and the vegetation still at the bottom. In general, when water levels drop significantly, it exposes mudflats, or it can, depending on timing and substrate conditions, then can support stands of non-persistent emergent plants, moist soil plants, in areas that had previously supported submersed aquatic vegetation or aquatic bed. For example, in 2010, 2012, 2018, and 2020. So more or less drawdown years. When these areas are reflooded, for example, in 13 and 19, submersed aquatic vegetation and aquatic bed has sometimes returned, at least to some degree. However, increasing water levels in 21 and 22 did not result in rebounds of aquatic bed. The most dramatic declines in the areal extent and the density of submersed aquatic vegetation have been in recent years. Next, turbidity. Increased turbidity can limit light penetration, thereby negatively impacting submersed aquatic vegetation. Additionally, decreased SAV can contribute to increased turbidity by reducing the stabilizing effects of vegetation on sediment and allowing for more wave action. Turbidity is added as the brown line on the top graph. Through 2017, there appears to have been more of a positive correlation between turbidity and submersed aquatic vegetation density, the red lines. As turbidity increased, SAV density generally increased, which isn't intuitive, at least not to me. Beginning in 2018, there appears to have been more of a negative correlation between turbidity and SAV, albeit less clear. It's reasonable that there are thresholds above which turbidity more dramatically limits SAV. Any relationships between turbidity and the areal extent of SAV are less discernible to me, although the threshold concept may be contributing to fewer hectares of SAV in recent years. Another factor potentially negatively influencing SAV is common carp abundance. These benthic omnivores root around in the sediment, directly reducing SAV by dislodging and/or consuming the plants, and indirectly by increasing turbidity through more complex routes. For example, the green line in the top graph shows annual electrofishing catch rates by the of common carp by the Illinois River Biological Station staff. Beginning in 2018, there appears to be a negative correlation between carp catch rates and both SAV areal extent and density. Again, it may have to do with threshold. For today, last but not least, is herbivory. Herbivores can certainly impact SAV directly, but also indirectly as well. While there are numerous herbivores that could impact SAV, for example, turtles, grass carp, and coots, our best data set during the growing season for SAV is for mute swans. One might anticipate a negative correlation between swan numbers and SAV. Not much apparent to me in the early years, but it appears there may be a weak negative correlation in recent years, again, possibly indicating a threshold. And swan numbers are shown in black here. If any, negative correlations between SAV and turbidity, common carp abundance in swans are most likely. The more of the stressors, the less of the SAV. And unfortunately, over time, the trends have been increasing for turbidity, for common carp, and for swans. While we have numerous additional data sets, I hope you get the picture. Stressors on SAV may be many, they may be interrelated, may involve thresholds, and may vary temporally and spatially. Potentially very complex, and we certainly do not have it all figured out. So, in the meantime, our plans are to continue monitoring of plant and animal communities, water quality, and hydrology, to continue harvest of rough fish, especially carps, common carps, as well as big-headed carps, by commercial fishers, and to investigate and employ more effectual techniques for removal of these undesirable species that may be impacting SAV. To identify and assess relevant experiences and research results from others to see if we can apply those to Emiquon. Correlation and analysis to identify, quantify, and better understand relationships among aquatic vegetation and other factors, especially potential drivers. As practical, identify and implement focused research to better understand relationships among aquatic vegetation and other factors, especially potential drivers. To consider our current understanding of aquatic vegetation trends and perceived influencing factors and drivers in our ongoing management actions. And last, but to develop and implement effectual long-term management strategies and an adaptive management framework to ensure the ecological health of Emiquon and contribute to the Illinois River, and through sharing science and lessons learned to impact positively other large floodplain river systems. Thank you for your time, and I hope I have some time for questions.